on the Trump administration's illegal actions to shut down the Department of Education. We came today to cut through the misinformation and chaos that this administration has intentionally sowed to get at the truth. And here's the truth. Executive orders are not laws, and they do not have the power to create laws. Only Congress can do that. The Department of Education was established by Congress 45 years ago. It cannot be closed without congressional action. That is illegal. Despite Secretary McMahon's assurance to senators during her confirmation hearing that Congress is legally required to be involved in any major structural changes to the department, her actions, along with those of the president, have consistently contradicted both her own words and the Constitution. So we have come to her, and today we demanded answers about the department's timeline for closing. We asked about how civil rights would be enforced with a drastically cut Office of Civil Rights, what cuts to early childhood education programs would be enacted, and how students would be guaranteed their right to a free and fair and equal education. We asked to be given details on contract cancellations, the gutting of federal staff, and the choking off of federal funding. So let me just say, I'll depart from what my prepared remarks are and report just very briefly on what actually happened in the meeting. I have to say that the Secretary indicated more than once that before she moved any functions of the department to other departments, any other place, that she was looking carefully at what the statute allows her to do. That was refreshing information that the Secretary conveyed to all of us. And we certainly hope that she sticks to what she said to us today, that she is looking to what the statute allows her to do. For a generally lawless, extra-constitutional, extra-legal administration at the top, the words from this secretary were much different than I had expected. We did ask questions about how civil rights would be enforced, that the largest civil rights enforcement entity is in this very department, and it has been reduced substantively by actual dismissals of personnel. She again, left me with the impression, and left many of us with the impression, that she was still considering the matter of how she would move, say, OCR to HHS, or maybe even the Department of Justice. Not clear about where that stands. I'm going to end my comments here because I have many colleagues who were in that meeting. I invite your questions, and certainly I invite my colleagues to respond as they feel, most authoritatively on what questions they could answer. So I'm going to end my comments here, and so any questions you may have. Yes?
Did the Secretary say anything about student loans and how she plans to move those out of the department, and any plans to change existing federal programs?
Colleagues, anybody want to respond to that? Go ahead, Frederica.
She's going to transfer student loans to the Small Business Administration. And as we stand here, they're dismantling the Department of Education. It might sound so systemic, or they're using a good approach, but I am in shock that after all of these years, and we know what will happen to young children. I'm a school principal, a school administrator, a school board member, and I know what happens when schools do not have oversight from the federal government, when states do not have oversight for the federal government to educate their children. I'm from Florida, and my governor is trying to privatize every school, ban books, and disallow children's identity. So for the Department of Education to be dismantled is going to be a shock to this nation, because schools are the bedrock of this country. When schools are working, our country is moving. What happened during the pandemic? During the pandemic, everyone was at a standstill until schools opened. And when schools open, then everyone is moving. So that's what's supposed to happen to student loans.
Just a quick follow-up. Do you feel more or less comfortable with how the department is going about moving these different parts of the administration after speaking to the secretary the day before?
People are in panic. People are afraid. Parents are afraid. Children are afraid. We don't know. Everything is, this is what we think. This is what might happen. This is how we do it. And the secretary herself doesn't know. She's not an educator. She's using the people who work in this building to help her move through this process. But we asked her if she would keep us informed as they went along.
Yeah, go ahead,
Thank
Veronica.
you. I think something important for everyone to know is that the overarching theme with the various functions, we're cutting the bureaucracy and we're going to send the money to the states. That was the overarching message. I will say it was really refreshing to be able to sit in a room and ask our questions. We are all very grateful that she took the time to respond to our letter, and she allowed more questions than what we had planned for, which is a great sign, and we hope to continue the open lines of communication with her, and we're grateful for that. But when you cut the bureaucracy, especially in the way that this administration has done, the consequences are always bad. We are hearing from our constituents about the cuts to the IRS and the long wait times to talk to someone. We're hearing about the same thing with Social Security. When you cut the people who administer the programs, when you cut the people who provide oversight for contractors and for how the money is spent, there is no doubt that the recipients of those programs will be negatively impacted. The other component that is terrifying for those of us in red states is we have governors who may not want to administer the money, or they will use the money in a way that is punitive to districts and communities they don't like and rewards communities and districts that they do like or who are politically aligned. We're seeing that retribution form of government from the Trump administration every single day, every single hour. The other source of concern for those of us in Texas and in other red states is what we've seen with healthcare funding. In Texas, when it comes to Medicare funding, for example, well, the state of Texas uses poor communities like El Paso, which I represent, to pull down federal funding, then decides we're gonna send the money to communities using a different formula, and they make up whatever formula they want. The federal government is the great equalizer, making sure that kids are protected, making sure that the money is going where it needs to go. So the idea that we're going to cut the federal bureaucracy, the literal translation of that and what the American public should expect is that we're cutting the oversight and we're cutting the ability to ensure that the money gets where it needs to go, even if the money stays put.
Next question. Yes, go ahead.
Two questions, if I may. One is, was there any indication of any oversight that would be required, or is the money just going to the states and then the federal government stands off? That's question one. And then the second one is, maybe this would be for Congressman Raskin. Does this meeting change the court cases that are currently?
Okay, I'll take the first question and then call on Mr. Raskin. I think very unclear. She kept talking about money going back to the states. She distinguished between Title I and how Title I is administered, but we didn't get into, which I certainly hope, there'll be more groups going to see her after this, about block granting. I think that's a big concern reflected by many colleagues already, is block granting money so that governors will have discretion, inadequate oversight over how money gets spent, the elimination or drastic reduction, the skeletal crew that remains with OCR. How are students with disabilities going to have their right to a meaningful education under IDEA? How is that going to be enforced? There are parents of students with disabilities all across this country who are very scared about their students not getting served by school districts. And of course, as Veronica Escobar mentioned, the federal government is the great equalizer, making sure that every child has a right to a meaningful education, whether that child has disabilities, whether that child comes from a certain religious background, whether they come from a racial background, a gender. That's what OCR is charged with doing and what Congress set up. And it's no mistake that they have regional offices where inspectors go out to the schools to ensure that those rights are being enforced and are being delivered on. And that's what is exactly, regional offices have been closed. And that's what members are very concerned about. Mr. Raskin?
Yeah, thank you. Let me start with what I take to be the good news. First of all, Secretary McMahon met with us. My colleagues and I have signed dozens of letters requesting meetings with different cabinet secretaries. And so we want to express our gratitude to Secretary McMahon for meeting with us and hearing about the tremendous concerns that our constituents have all across America about what's taking place. The second bit of good news is that she reassured us multiple times that she plans to follow what federal law is. So I think that she doesn't want to end up in court being sued and struck down the way so many of the other departments and agencies have been struck down because they've just thrown caution to the winds and dismantled actual congressional rules and mandates that have been put in place for the people. So all of that is to the good. Now, we have the concern that there are decades-long bodies of law and precedent that have been built up in this institution to enforce the rights of families and kids all across America. Title I is a critical part of that. Title VI is a critical part of that. Title IX is a critical part of that. And so the idea of dismembering the department, which we understand predates Secretary McMahon, but the idea of dismembering the department and then parceling it out to other agencies and departments does not give us a lot of confidence or hope in what's happening. And we tried to express that. I think she did express that while there is a mandate to take down the Department of Education, there's not a mandate to take down education. But we just want to make sure that that's not what's going to happen. And I think that that's the essence of the conflict here. And civil rights does become the crux of the controversy. So much of American history has been consumed with people fighting for the right to have their kids educated without racial discrimination. That's what Brown versus Board of Education is all about. That's what so much of the Civil Rights Act is all about. Fighting to make sure that kids with disabilities have a right to an individualized education plan and to get the services that they need. And we don't want the second Trump administration to be the moment where all of the progress that we've made in American history towards an equal and excellent education for everybody suddenly goes down the drain. And that's why we're here, and that's why we're engaged in this dialogue with Secretary McMahon and with her staff. And we hope that we will be able to continue to have dialogue with her and make sure that education continues to improve in America rather than sink back to a time when whole parts of the population were just left out.
It's a good way to end.
Yeah.
Next question? Yes, go ahead.
I know that she said she would be guided by statutes. I know you're encouraged by that, but do you feel that she would have the autonomy to make important decisions, or whether she would be influenced by what the White House said?
Again, expressing gratitude for the fact that this meeting even occurred, which I think is the first time maybe a cabinet secretary has sat down with members of Congress. So let's start with the positive. Other positive, as it has been mentioned, she was very clear multiple times that she was going to respect statute, and before making any dismantling decisions that impact statute, she will seek the input of Congress, and of course she has to actually seek the action of Congress as well. So that
was encouraging. It could have been much, much, much worse. So leaving here now in Maryland, thank you for being here, Jeff. We're also very concerned, as are many of my colleagues, about the clawback of federal funds, ESSER funds, that impact probably everybody's districts here. We did talk about that. She expressed that she is going to be looking at those letters from us, from Congress, individually, looking at how that funding has been spent individually to ensure that it did go to addressing the learning loss that occurred across this country during COVID. And I think we all have some letters to write today. And so we're going to be continue to be action oriented as a group.
Next question. Yes, but you're back there. So as for the mood, I'll let Greg, you want to take that?
Look, it was, of course, refreshing that we were able to have the meeting and learn the truth. But I and others, I think we became more and more alarmed as the meeting went on, because I think the tie-in amongst all of this, and Ranking Member Raskin laid it out clearly, is that current law, won by so many Americans in this democracy, is that all kids deserve a decent education. That the money goes to your kid if they're in need. The money goes to your kid no matter their race or their background or their neighborhood. And they want to change that. That's what it comes down to. They might call it money going to the states or reorganization or block grants. They'll call it whatever they want to call it. But they essentially want to be able to send money to the communities they like and punish the ones they don't. Just like right now they give pardons to the guys they like and prosecute the people that they don't. Just like they're giving government contracts to the folks that are their donors and punishing the people that they don't. Now they're saying your kids are on the chopping block if we don't like them. That's what this comes down to. They essentially, what she tried to say in the nicest of terms, is that she wants to allow, get rid of the guardrails that protect all of our kids and instead say, no, we can have it set up so that states can give money to the private schools that we like and take away money from the public schools that we may not like. Or we want to be able to give money to a community because they bow down to us in the culture war and take away money from a community because we want to have a fight about some social issue. And our kids, especially those that are struggling in the classroom, especially in communities that don't have enough money, especially our kids with special education needs, they shouldn't get caught up in the kind of Trump grift. But I expect what we're going to see, why I think the alarm was growing as the meeting went on, is that it feels like no matter what nice words they may put on it, at the end of the day, it feels like they're going to take our kids' money, this taxpayer money that's supposed to be going to our classrooms, and it's going to be another payday for the people that line up and support the Trump administration while innocent students and parents and families and teachers take the hit.
Thank you. Next question. Next question. Yes. So I think you bring up a good point about, so a lot of ambiguity about when the end date and lights out date will be. That's the question I try to drive home with her. Like, you know, you acknowledged before a Senate confirmation hearing that the Congress had to be involved. Yet you have an executive order which tells you you're supposed to begin the final mission. A lot of unsatisfactory sort of ambiguity about, yes, I'm going to look at statute, I'm going to conform to statute, but yet you can end the department de facto by cutting and slashing the workforce so the department just absolutely doesn't fulfill its functions. Does not, she's not fulfilling the functions. That was not explored. Melanie, you want to answer the question as well? Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Melanie Stansbury from New Mexico's 1st Congressional District. I'd love to address both this and some of the other questions. First of all, it's very apparent that the Secretary is treating this as a corporate restructuring, and we want to be clear that the education of our children is not a corporate enterprise. It is how we move this country forward, and if we are going to secure the education for millions of Americans, we need this department to function. And while they may acknowledge, and while the Secretary may have acknowledged in this meeting that she has statutory requirements, they are de facto dismantling the agency. And I think to your point, it's very clear that the RIFs, the firing of probationary staff, the so-called restructuring that's happening, when we asked for a plan multiple times in this meeting, we were told there is not a plan yet. And so our question is, if there's not a plan, then why are you firing thousands of people? How are you going to ensure that our states are compliant with the civil rights requirements? How are you going to ensure that students with disabilities are going to get the accommodations? How are you going to ensure that in states where there is not the infrastructure and the people to administer these programs, that they will be able to administer them? And they do not have a plan. So they are de facto restructuring this entity along a corporate model without a plan and without an effort to really protect our students. So we want to be clear about that. I want to say one other thing, the mood in the room, it was very collegial. We are extraordinarily grateful to the Secretary that she joined us. Thank you. She's here. Perhaps I should give her the podium. We're extraordinarily grateful that the Secretary gave us the space to have these conversations. But with all due respect, Madam, I think my biggest concern is that the states will not be able to protect the programs and services that you would like to devolve with them.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. And I just want to express my gratitude to all of these folks who came today so that we could have an open discussion about what I believe is one of the most important things that we can have a discussion on or action on in our country, and that is the education of our young people. As Representative Tanako said as we were ending the meeting, which I thought was incredibly appropriate, and that is that this is not a partisan issue. This is about the children of America, and it's the next generation, the generation after that. And if we want to have our leaders, if we want to have that next group of engineers and doctors and lawyers and plumbers and electricians and HVAC operators, then we need to focus on how they can best have their education. And I believe, and I know the President does believe this as well, the best education is that is closest to the child, where teachers and parents, local superintendents working together, and local school boards to develop the curriculum for those students is the best way that it can happen. Funding from the United States government will continue through the programs that have already been established, and I will look forward to continuing to work with members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. And I welcome the fact that these folks came today and expressed their concerns and shared in an open, collegial format their concerns and how we can lead now to work more together. That's the way it ought to operate, and I'm very happy to have had them here. So I'm going to let them answer the questions. I just wanted to come out and have.
While you're here, can you just answer the question? When are you going to shut down this building?
Well, we've had our discussions already. So thank you all very, very much for coming.
Thank you all.
As you see, she's not answering the question when she's going to shut down the Department of Education.
She doesn't know.
She doesn't have a plan, and while she doesn't have a plan, they're continuing to look at firing people, reduction in RIFs, reduction in force, maybe doing it with a velvet glove, but still it has the effect of an iron fist.
Dismantling the Department of Education.
Dismantling.
Is what's happening.
So you just saw that she didn't answer the question. Yes. Well, she has agreed. There was like 75, 79 the signatories to the letter that I helped to lead. She has agreed to meet with additional groups. This is the first tranche of members. First tranche of members. Somehow, Ms. Federica got a separate meeting with the Secretary. I don't know how you did it. I did. Any discrepancies you want to mention? Any clarity you got from that separate meeting?
I think my concern was about HBCUs and minority serving institutions and what was going to happen with those institutions if the Department of Education no longer exists, because you can't really transfer that to states. And I also had concern about the Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Education and how was that going to function in an oversight capacity to make sure that there was no discrimination as it related to the children who attend our public education, who are serviced, because charter schools and private schools have the ability to turn children away. Public schools were built to educate everyone, the gifted, the ungovernable, children in wheelchairs, children who are poor, children who are rich. So it's for everyone. And I am concerned that when you begin to take the federal oversight away and put it in the hands of states, we have red states who don't want public education to exist. And this is my fear. As a former principal of a school, a member of a school board, and a district administrator, I know, and I have a crystal ball, and I know what will happen if they dismantle the entire Department of Education. And this is something, you keep saying a due date or when it's going to happen. This is not something that you can just do. It requires a plan. It requires people who understand the impact that all of these departments make. And you're not going to, it's not a simple chore, and it's going to take several years, and hopefully by then we'll have a new administration in.
Mr. Raskin is going to answer the question on courts, and we have another question over here.
So the federal courts have been very emphatic that the basic rules of the civil service cannot be dismantled for some other agenda. For example, tens of thousands of federal employees have lost their jobs simply because they were in the probationary category. They were probationary employees not because they had done anything wrong, but because they either had just been hired recently or they'd been promoted because they had performed in an excellent way in their prior jobs. The courts have struck that down and restored those people, although shamefully in some federal departments they're saying that they will pay those people, but they won't allow them to work. But in any event, that is not a way around the civil service. Another way around the civil service that doesn't work is to simply describe someone as a DEI hire or a DEI employee. That is not a federal category by which anybody gets hired. And so that has also been a way to try to circumvent the rules of the civil service, but the courts have said no. Under the civil service, people can only be hired for their own poor performance or professional misconduct. And unfortunately, we've been seeing thousands of federal workers who have excellent performance evaluations who've been fired. So I don't know what's taken place in the last several days at the Department of Education, and we're going to have to look into that. And obviously, the workers, and if they have representation, those people will be focused on that. But you know, the forces that are saying that this is being done in a lawless way are winning in court every day. So in terms of programs, obviously Congress adopted a lot of the programs we're talking about, like college student loans or like Title VI or Title I, contemplating that they would be part of the Department of Education. And so to the extent that they're being stripped and relocated to other parts of the federal government, that would have to conform to federal statute. And it may or it may not. We don't really understand what the policy purpose is, and a lot of people fear that it is a part of a program to dismantle not just the Department of Education, but the federal commitment to education. Exactly. So we are going to be zealously watching that to make sure that those programs that the Congress of the United States, the people's representatives, have adopted are effectuated. by this department or some other department, we are going to make sure, for example, as Congresswoman Wilson says, that the civil rights commitments that we've adopted are secure. And we're just afraid that they want to replace the civil rights commitment of the federal government with a war on DEI. And those two things don't fit together.
But to answer
Another
your
question.
the court cases stand. So just very quickly, just because I think she's asking a very specific question, the court orders that have been put in place requiring the rehiring of probationary staff stand. Just because they acknowledge that the law exists doesn't mean that they're not breaking it. And the courts have been very clear about that. The court orders that have been put in place over the last several weeks regarding personnel here at the Department of Education must be followed. And I think to the question that was asked, are they following the law? The courts have already weighed in. No, they are not.
And I'll just say, you know, it was in my committee where I got an employee of the Department of the Veterans Affairs to actually admit that Tracy Therrett, that she, even though she signed the memorandum that fired all of the members of the Department of Veterans Affairs staffing, Judge Alsup ruled with that testimony in mind that the memo she signed actually came from the Office of Personnel, OPM, Office of Personnel Management, and said, you know, the Office of Personnel Management cannot direct other departments and agencies to fire people, and therefore those probationary employees that were fired under that authority had to be reinstated. They are dragging their feet. I know of employees that have been reinstated, other employees that are being paid but are not allowed to work. And so there's a very passive, aggressive resistance by this administration. Any more questions over here? You haven't asked a question yet. Go ahead.
Can you speak to Secretary McMahon's response to any concern people have about the department's ability to carry out on serving students with disabilities?
Well, look,
On what?
students with disabilities. That is a concern we raised specifically in it relates to the Office of Civil Rights. How is that going to be? How is this function going to be fulfilled if you're going to move the function around? One, she acknowledged that she was checking into the law about it. But here's the thing: you just saw me ask her the question, when are you going to shut this department down? The executive order issued by the president directs her to begin the process of doing that. She doesn't have an answer to when this department's going to shut down. I think part of the story of today is, you know, President's campaign promise to shut this department down is a lot of fluff. He can't. It's illegal. He can't do it by law. She's acknowledged so much that you know that there's a law that she can't. She's having her lawyers examine how she can move functions around, and she really didn't answer the question about when she's shutting this department down. But in the meantime, I'm afraid that all these firings at OCR, the Office of Civil Rights, means that students with disabilities, students that are facing discrimination because of anti-Semitism or Islamophobia, students are facing discrimination based on race or gender or sexual orientation, aren't going to have the Office of Civil Rights able to enforce their rights against discrimination against districts around this country.
And I know that the plan that they have for Title I is this. They plan to block grant Title I to states for 10 years. And then after 10 years, they're hoping that within 10 years, they will have Congress to dismantle Title I. But Title I is not going to go away, but it's going to be in the form of a block grant to a state. In red states, where we have children that we're concerned about, that's the worry. That's the panic.
Yes, one more. Well, I think all federal employees, there are federal employees who were contemplating accepting, you know, the bonus to go away. But I believe there are many federal employees who believe it's their duty and their job to protect the students of this country. There are people in other departments in the federal government who understand the role of the civil service, an independent civil service, a meritorious, a civil service established by merit and not by spoils, under the administration of Chester Arthur in the 1880s, and several bills subsequent to that were passed to reform the civil service. We don't want a spoils system in our government. We don't want reward your friends, punish your enemies, hire a bunch of your people that are your followers in the federal government. That's what the civil service is about. And to destroy that civil service is to destroy the evolved nature of our democracy, the evolved nature of the freedom that we enjoy, to not have the civil service turned into a spoils system and the instrument of an autocratic leader to get his will done. So I would say to those people in the Department of Education, stand your ground. Stand your ground. Don't give in. You obey your oath that you swore to, which is to the Constitution and the laws of our country. Ms. Moore, why don't you go ahead?
I just want to say this. Just keep in mind where all of this originated from. This came from Florida. This whole Department of Education closure came from the Moms of Liberty, who would show up at school board meetings across Florida demanding that books be banned, that their children, their little boys, were being turned into girls, that LGBTQ plus children should not be in our schools, that we were turning little boys into girls. All of this came about from Florida. And as it became popular, President Trump adopted it. And he started saying, well, why do all of this emanates from the Department of Education? So why do we need a Department of Education? Let these moms of liberty write our curriculum. Let these moms of liberty tell us how to educate our children. Let these moms of liberty tell us that you should not teach Black history, that you should wipe the pages clean. Remember now, this is a conversation that's been going on for about 12 years during President Trump's first term. Just keep that in mind. Okay.
Ms. Moore.
Take one final question from Congresswoman Moore. And then...
Thank you. I'm the cleanup woman, Gwen Moore from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Just let me say to a question that wasn't answered with regard to what will happen to student loans. The secretary said that she had talked to the Treasury Secretary so that they were going to turn that over to the Treasury or to Commerce with a focus on collecting debt. That was the focus. I don't know about the administration of future loans. I also want to address questions that have, about devolution. We asked many questions about how you can devolve monies to the state, however you do that, block granted, whatever. But how can you devolve the responsibilities and the authorities under the Civil Rights Acts to states? And we pointed out that there would be partisan governors who would receive this devolution, and as many people have pointed out already, that they would discriminate against certain communities and would be allowed to do it. In fact, the Title I, Title VI, Title IX were all put into place. The history of that is that people, particularly Black kids, could not get justice on the local level, and we find that that is still true. What would I say to the employees who are there? I would commend to them the words of John Lewis: don't give up, don't give out, don't give in. I would also commend to them the words of Tim Schneider, who's written a lot of books, and one I would quote from On Tyranny, chapter 1, and that is don't surrender in advance. Just like you've heard from all these leaders, the Department of Education is a statutory, it's a law put in place by Title I of the Constitution, and it will remain there until we decide that it should not exist. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gwen Moore.
Thank
All right, thank you, and we'll conclude this availability.